Have you ever wondered why individuals living in the same country but different cities often sound so different? Or perhaps how languages create words out of the blue that just seem to belong? Or better yet, how babies who start with a blank slate manage to pick up their native language? These are the sorts of questions linguists ask. So, what exactly is linguistics? Linguistics refers to the scientific study of language, focusing on its systems and phenomena. It's about language theory, not learning languages themselves. There exists many subtypes of linguistics relating to social identity, the biology of our brains, and even history and why language changes. But today, we'll cover 5 topics you can learn in this Introduction to English Linguistics class. Picture this: a Korean speaker, Hyeyun, and an English speaker, Kristen, are organizing a project together. Hyeyun asks Kristen to bring her notebook to the meeting. So, naturally, Kristen turns up to the meeting with this, only to find out they were not thinking of the same notebook.
It's awkward, right? That little misunderstanding happened because words changed their meaning over time. Now, if words change, shouldn't we be able to trace their history? That's what etymology does. It's the history of a word origin and how its form of meaning shift. To understanding this, we need to look at the history of English. Imagine English is essentially an omnivore, always hungry for new words. Why? Because its history is a constant cycle of invasion and influence. English began as a Germanic language in the Old English period. From the 6th to 8th century, the conversion to Christianity brought in terms from Latin and Greek, the languages of religion and learning. Then, from the 18th to 10th century, the Vikings began to settle. They introduced fundamental everyday words from Old Norse like egg and take, simplifying the vocabulary just to communicate and trade. The biggest event was the Norman conquest in 1066. The French-speaking Normans became the ruling class. This created the massive vocabulary gap. French introduced thousands of sophisticated words from government, law, and high culture. Later, academic terms came from Latin and Greek, words like data and concept. So, English is a language that became fluent in borrowing out of historical necessity. This is why its vocabulary is one of the largest and most diverse in the world. Now, let's see how those words evolve through semantic shift. What happens when a word decides it needs a new job? Let's look at 2 types of shift. For example, holiday originally meant only a religious festival. Today, holiday has expanded to mean any kind of public festival or vacation day. The meaning grew wider, like stretching a rubber band. In contrast, narrowing is when a word becomes more specific. In Old English, hund meant any dog, but today, hound refers only to a specific kind of hunting dog. The meaning got narrower, like zooming in on a map. Now, back to our intro about the notebook. This borrowing and meaning shift process happens in Korean too. When English words enter Korean, they adapt to fit the culture. This isn't bad English or broken English. It's adaptation. Just like English adapted to French rule, Korean adopts borrowed words to fit its context. So, remember, language never stays still. It grows, borrows, and evolves. And that is the beauty of etymology.
In linguistics, variation refers to the systematic differences across languages, but also within specific languages. 2 types of variation are social, depending on social situations and context, and regional, depending on geographical differences. To expand on regional variation, the varieties within a language can be referred to as dialects that belong to a community of speakers and contain their own systematic differences to the standard variety. Not just accent differences, but also grammar, vocabulary, and even word form differences all count. Therefore, they can sometimes be very difficult to understand to an outsider, despite ultimately being the same language. So, where do we draw the line between language and dialect? Well, some say if speakers from both language varieties can understand each other, then they are dialects of the same language. This understanding is what we call mutual intelligibility. For example, speakers of British English can understand with little to no difficulty speakers of American English, though geographically they are far apart. This is because despite British people eating chips and Americans eating fries, fundamentally the language structure and system is the same. On the other hand, the many dialects of Italy have countless distinctions in phonetics, grammar, and vocabulary, as well as low mutual intelligibility. As a result, despite Italians themselves calling them dialects, they are in fact distinct languages that simply share a nation. Social variation, on the other hand, encompasses racial factors, gender, class, and sometimes age. The fact that this variation is context dependent means it also can change. This would be called style shifting. Style shifting happens when an individual switches their speech variety to one associated with a certain group, either to emphasize distance from said group or show membership and relatability. In English, a common example would be AAE, African American English, a variety associated with racial factors considering African American history. Although an African American would say, "I ain't never told no lie," to fellow members of the same group, when conversing with an outsider, they would likely change this to, "I have never told a lie." It is important to remember the reason for a variety turning into the standard is simply power. The variety used by the wealthy, powerful, and in general heard in the media and taught in schools has no real linguistic superiority to any other.
Word formation explores how new words enter our language, whether it's through the conversion of pre-existing words or the creation of new words altogether. Specifically, we will focus on how it's used in modern English, the technique called conversion, and how that can be connected to potential shifts in meaning. Language is constantly developing, and with the likes of the internet, it is no surprise that word conversions have become even more unconventional throughout the years. For example, normally the word ghost is an adjective, referring to the spirit or soul of the deceased. But in recent years, especially with the increase in texting culture, the term ghosting has been coined, which refers to a person suddenly ending the conversation or not replying to someone without any prior context or heads up. Funnily enough, an actual ghost and ghosting can both be seen as negative, but that doesn't mean that all word conversions follow the same concept. For example, the word clear in its literal sense can be a general neutral adjective, but when converted as a verb, it can be used in a more positive connotation, as means to resolve, improve, and remove obstacles. So it really depends on the context and scenarios the words are being used to determine whether the conversion of the word is suitable or not. In this example, we have focused on conversion, but please note that this is not the only technique that pertains to word formation. From borrowing, which adopts words from other languages, the most recognizable examples being the word rouge with the voiced fricative sh, which is borrowed from the French, to clipping, which is a way to shorten words without paying attention to the derivational morphology of a word, such as from examination to exam, or donation to donate. In short, word formation can be developed in many ways. Syntax refers to the arrangement of different words and phrases that are combined to form longer sentences. Breaking it down even further, smaller syntactic structures within a larger phrase are also known as syntactic constituents. We study constituents because it's important to understand that sentences are not simply linear or created out of intuition, but through a hierarchy. This is better visually shown through syntactic trees, which essentially show how phrase structures are combined using these lexical headings of NP, VP, and DP. NP stands for noun phrase and is seen as the root of nouns, adjectives, determiners, generally any major part of speech. VP stands for verb phrase and is the root for verbs, and PP stands for preposition phrase, which is the root for preposition. To give a better understanding, we can use the sentence, "Grandma baked me brownies for lunch," as an example. The breakdown would follow. First, the letter S, which stands for sentence, will be at the top, and from there, two branches will branch out. One will be NP and the other will be VP. Focusing on NP, we can detect that grandma is a proper noun, so we connect the NP to the branch PN, which is a proper noun for grandma. Then for the VP branch, baked is a verb, so we branch it out to a V, which stands for verb. And according to the generalization of the phrase structure rule, what follows after VP should be an NP, PP, or both. Going back to the sentence, we can branch VP to a new NP branch, where the pronoun me can be connected, as well as the noun brownies, so on and so forth.
The acquisition of one's native language is not considered particularly special by the average person, but actually there is a complex process of learning language that babies experience at a rate much faster than us adults. In fact, from birth to 1 year old, a baby's brain goes from 25% to 70%. This is due to something called the critical period. This describes the period from birth until the age of 7, where humans are particularly susceptible to picking up languages. They do this by listening to the input of adults around them and are constantly acquiring and refining the knowledge they learn, taking statistics. Babies start with a superpower-like ability to discriminate all sounds globally, regardless of what language their immediate environment speaks. So anytime an adult tries to learn a language and struggles with pronunciation, it's not because their mouth can't move in that way, but rather they've spent years taking statistics on their native language that they become culture-bound listeners. It has been proven, fascinatingly enough, that only an in-person language input is useful for babies' learning. This means you can make a baby listen to language via any device for months, and despite the critical period, they'll pick up nothing. But let's briefly go over the most notable steps of what acquisition process can actually look like. Babies begin by cooing, which essentially is just producing a sequence of high vowels like E and U. As the months pass, they discover their oral anatomy more and make slightly more varied vowel and consonant sounds, with affricates and liquids being the most lately acquired at around 3.5 to 5 years old. This is then called the babbling stage. They also learn to pick up on our intonation patterns, even though they may not always know what exactly we're saying, providing the social aspect of speech pre-language. By the one-word stage, about 12 to 18 months, they can connect gestures to their vocalizations and frequently say single-unit utterances. These utterances can be called holophrastic speech. Think of it as merging words into one. For instance, instead of saying, "What's that?" a baby might say something like, "What's that?" Their vocabulary and pronunciation then improves, reaching the two-word stage and eventually the telegraphic speech stage. Telegraphic speech refers to a string of words put in the correct order. For example, "this shoe all wet." At this point, a child's morphology is still quite simple, and therefore you will often see the overgeneralizing of a morphological rule. For example, "these mans have very big feet." They also take a while to fully understand how to use negations, mixing no with not and missing auxiliaries like will, didn't, etc. Funnily enough, they don't take on corrections very well either. So next time you're around a child of 3 years and above, do be conscious of how you speak, as you never know what they might pick up.
So, what is the point of all of this? Why does learning about linguistics matter so much? Well, it gives us a better understanding of human knowledge and behavior. Haven't you ever wondered about the origin behind what we say, why words are pronounced or made up of a certain way? Not everything can be coined out of thin air. The process of linguistics shows the evolution of humankind as we continue growing, developing, and creating language to create, share, and engage with people from all over the world. Now, let's put all this knowledge to the test.